The film opens with Jimmy Cullen, a hardened criminal known simply as Driver, who works as a getaway driver alongside his brother for daring heists. After one robbery, they're ambushed by a rival gang intent on stealing their loot. To save their lives, Driver reveals the cash's location, but his brother pays the price, his throat brutally slit, and Driver himself takes a bullet to the head. Miraculously, he survives but is sentenced to a decade in prison. Time in a cell only fuels his burning desire for revenge, setting him on a relentless and dangerous mission to hunt down everyone involved in his brother's murder. A large, tattooed man paces anxiously in his cell, his eyes occasionally drifting to a photo of himself with an unknown man on the wall. Finally, he's let out, introduced to us simply as Driver. The prison warden offers him parting advice and a business card for the tough times ahead. Driver doesn't care. He's only interested in one thing, the exit. Once outside, Driver discards the card and takes a long, hard run down the highway before finding his car, a sleek Chevrolet Chevelle SS waiting at a junkyard. He pulls off the cover, starts it effortlessly, and revs the engine. His mission is just beginning. Inside the glove compartment, he finds a stash of information leading him to his first target, along with a revolver hidden under the seat. Ignoring traffic laws, Driver navigates straight through rush hour chaos, brushing off honks and stares until he reaches his destination, an office. He strides in without a word, locates his target, a clerk, and without warning delivers cold, swift justice with a single shot. After leaving the scene, Driver notices he's been caught on a security camera. Meanwhile, we switch to a rundown roadside motel where a man in the restroom is trying to buy drugs. He pulls out a handful of crumpled bills, but the dealer isn't satisfied. After some tense bargaining, they come to an agreement, and the buyer heads back to his car with the goods. Back at the office where Driver just committed his murder, the scene is swarming with cops. Among them is the same buyer from the motel restroom, simply referred to as Cop. His colleagues, especially a no-nonsense female detective, aren't thrilled to see him, particularly with his upcoming retirement just weeks away. When Cop lights up a cigarette, the detective grimaces, snatching it and dunking it in a coffee cup, reminding him smoking is off-limits. Despite their friction, they're assigned to work the case together. In the next episode, Driver arrives at a small office where two men watch a news report on the recent murder. The man behind the desk greets him, mentioning that the dead clerk wasn't a good guy. Driver pays him for the car left at the junkyard, then demands the names of the other criminals linked to his brother's death. The man behind the desk smirks, saying the price of information has risen in the 10 years Driver spent in prison. He justifies the markup, claiming, "It took me 10 years to track these people down for you, and it wasn't cheap." Driver isn't pleased with the new pricing and demands answers. The informant tries to intimidate him, calling on his bodyguard, a fierce Samoan street fighting champion. But as soon as the bodyguard notices a tattoo on Driver's arm, his tough demeanor vanishes. Recognizing Driver, he stammers, "I know who you are, who your brother was. I got no beef with you," before fleeing, spooked, calling Driver a ghost. Left without backup, the informant becomes more cooperative, even offering Driver a small bonus. Meanwhile, at the police station, Cop and his partner, Cicero, review security footage from the office murder, noting that Driver and the victim seem to know each other. As the discussion ends, Cop gets a call from his son's mother, reminding him to drive their son to a baseball game. With the police hot on his trail, Driver moves on to his next target, Killer, a new character living in a luxurious home with his beautiful girlfriend. Killer is a fitness fanatic, his walls adorned with photos and magazine covers showcasing his achievements. We learn he had leg issues as a kid, but his dedication to intense, almost breakdancing-style yoga has turned him into a deadly force. Killer wakes his girlfriend up and chats with her in the backyard, mentioning he's finished with yoga and wants a new challenge. He's unusually cheerful for an assassin but receives a call about a new assignment, Driver. Without delay, Killer gets ready, assisted by his girlfriend, who helps him pack a gun and supplies. Just before leaving in his sports car, he dashes back to give her a quick kiss. As he drives, Killer calls his therapist, casually telling her he's growing tired of his work. He lies, saying he's a surgeon who removes tumors, though the therapist seems doubtful but continues the session. Meanwhile, Killer watches an elderly man suspiciously. Back at the police station, Detective Cicero examines a photo of Driver's tattoo as Sergeant Mallory apologizes for pairing her with Cop. He asks her to respect Cop's experience and role. Cicero then shows Cop a recent image of Driver, identified through surveillance and the prison warden's testimony. Cop grins knowingly, It turns out Driver made a name for himself smuggling items in prison. Cicero explains that Driver was arrested 10 years ago after a bank heist where he served as the getaway driver. We flash back to that robbery, watching Driver's skillful reverse driving to evade police, a maneuver that left the authorities empty-handed. As Cicero fills Cop in on more case details, the scene shifts to the elderly man's house that Killer has been watching. The man arrives with a young woman helping him carry groceries. He convinces her to stay for a drink, eyeing her with a hidden agenda. Meanwhile, Driver pulls up outside. Killer, wrapping up his phone call with his therapist, mentions he's planning to propose to his girlfriend and that he's gone off his meds, which the therapist warns against before hanging up. Now armed, Killer exits his car, ready to pursue Driver, who's already making his way toward the house. Inside, the old man slyly slips something into his guest's drink, waiting for her to pass out. Killer trails Driver, entering right behind him. A flashback cuts to video footage that Cop and Cicero are reviewing, revealing Driver and his brother bound and held hostage by a gang of thugs. Driver's brother, terrified, urges him not to reveal where their stash is, fearing they'll be killed. The captors taunt them, claiming the rest of Driver's gang has already been eliminated. They insist their only hope of survival is to give up the location of the stolen cash. Driver, torn between protecting his brother and escaping alive, struggles with what to do. The thugs pressure Driver and his brother, firing shots in the air and yelling threats. Eventually, Driver breaks and reveals the money's location. But the moment he does, a thug slits his brother's throat without hesitation. Some gang members question the decision, but most remain indifferent. All of it is recorded by the old man, now being targeted by Killer in the present. Back in real time, Driver bursts through the old man's door, stopping his twisted plans. The elderly thug stammers, claiming Driver's brother was killed under someone else's orders. Driver isn't swayed and fires 2 clean shots, ending him. He leaves the terrified caretaker behind and steps into the hallway, where Killer is already waiting. But before Killer can make a move, a girl from a neighboring apartment steps out, complicating things. Driver quickly pushes her into her apartment, and a tense shootout breaks out. Driver skillfully forces Killer to take cover, giving him just enough time to escape. Frustrated, Killer watches from the old man's window as Driver makes his getaway. The assassin watches smoke rise from the tires of Driver's departing Chevrolet. A final flashback shows Driver being shot in the head after revealing the money's location, but not before he vows revenge. Miraculously, he survives, and a metal plate now holds his skull together. Later, Cop arrives late at his ex-wife's to pick up his son, Tommy. She's annoyed, accusing him of never being there. On the drive, Tommy admits he doesn't even like baseball much. Cop tries to reassure him, but then gets a call from Cicero about a new crime scene. Seeing Tommy's disappointment, Cop decides to stay for the game, surprising himself as he puts family first, at least for now. Cop arrives 2 hours late to the scene, earning a caustic remark from Cicero. They discover that the murdered old man was a fan of recording dirty tapes, and was the one who filmed Driver's brother's murder. The detectives are aware of the shootout with Killer but can't identify the second shooter. Meanwhile, Killer admits to his girlfriend that Driver proved tougher than expected, admiring his fearlessness. In a flash of inspiration, he proposes to her right there on the phone, and she smiles, about to say yes. The next day at the station, Cicero notices a tattoo on Cop's arm, leading to the revelation that he previously served in the notorious Los Angeles Homicide Squad, where he met his ex-wife, Marina, a former informant. She learns he's been through rehab, but he assures her it's ancient history. Cop lies, claiming he got clean when his son was born. Meanwhile, Driver watches his next target, a woman, accompanying her son outside. Armed and determined, he enters her house, only to discover she's feeding a baby. During their tense conversation, she slaps him, revealing that she's not his target, but his ex-wife, Marina. Driver mistakenly thought the boy he saw was his son, but he learns that she moved on and started a new life. Tragically, she had an abortion, and Driver's dreams of fatherhood crumble. Devastated by the news, he leaves, more resolved than ever on his path of vengeance. Killer plans a lavish wedding with his fiancée, Lily, complete with car races and a beautiful ceremony. The most romantic part, however, involves a shooting at the reception. He promises Lily a fresh start in Pasadena, vowing to leave his life as a hired gun behind. Meanwhile, Cop arrives at Marina's house uninvited and is shocked to find her watching news coverage of his case on TV. Cop tries to persuade Marina to get back together, hoping to start fresh. However, she firmly declines, explaining that she has moved on, pursuing a degree to improve her life and that of her son. In a desperate attempt, Cop offers her his stash of illegal substances, promising to go to rehab but suggesting they wait until after his case is wrapped up, wanting just one day with her and their son. She hesitates but doesn't outright refuse. Meanwhile, Driver, listening to the radio, drives into the night toward his next target. He stops at a strip club, tracks down a security guard, and heads inside. After a brief conversation in the restroom, he realizes this man is the one who slit his brother's throat. The killer orders an elderly doorman, Joe, to leave and pretend he hasn't seen anything, but Driver locks the door instead. A brutal knife fight ensues, and Driver emerges victorious. The dying man apologizes and begs Driver to call his son to say he's sorry. Driver leaves him gasping on the floor and fulfills the man's last wish. Meanwhile, Killer sits on his couch, flipping through old photos. When he finds pictures from his childhood showing his crippled legs, his expression shifts as he reaches out to touch his scars. Killer frantically polishes his weapon when Lily catches him in the act. He insists he has to finish this job first, remaining adamant despite her pleas. Meanwhile, Cop wakes up in bed with his son, who reveals he doesn't like baseball. Cop encourages him, saying he just needs more practice and suggests they play together since he's not very good either. Later, he discovers Marina intoxicated in the bathroom, where she confesses her fear of falling back into the painful cycle they once shared. Cop throws his substances in the trash and falls asleep beside her. On the fourth day, both Cop and Killer leave their homes, looking troubled. Cop gets a call from Cicero, who has found a lead. Driver's victims were police informants linked to his brother's murder. He brushes off her request, saying he needs to talk to the stabbing victim, Henderson, at the emergency room. Ignoring Cicero, he rushes to the hospital, where Driver, hearing the news of Henderson's survival, makes a dramatic U-turn and speeds toward the medical facility. Once there, Driver heads straight for the operating room, where doctors are trying to save Henderson's life. Without hesitation, he pulls out his gun and fires several shots into the man's forehead. Hearing the gunshots, Cop rushes from a nearby room to pursue Driver, and they find themselves in a fierce gunfight in the basement. In a tense moment, Driver catches Cop off guard, forcing him to kneel. But just as Cop closes his eyes, Driver vanishes. Driver hops into his car and speeds away, receiving a call from the son of his brother's killer. The boy threatens revenge, and Driver coldly tells him to do what he must, warning him of the repercussions. Just then, Killer catches up from behind, and a dangerous chase ensues. Driver is shot in the neck but manages to shoot out Killer's tire, escaping into the night. Frustrated, Killer gets a call from his client, who cancels the assignment, but he refuses to give up on his final job. Meanwhile, Driver arrives at his father's house, suspecting he might have betrayed them after the heist. Instead, he finds only his mother, who lost her husband a few years back. She tends to his wound and reassures him that his father would never have betrayed him. Driver explains how they robbed the bank to pay off Gary's debts, emphasizing he couldn't abandon his brother in his time of need. After picking up his brother's ashes, he sets off to find his next target, plagued by thoughts of who might have set them up. At the police station, Cop tells Cicero about his encounter with Driver at the hospital and how he miraculously survived. The team congratulates him for nearly taking down the criminal, and Cicero forgives him for hanging up, presenting a list of possible targets for Driver. These informants have served minimal time for serious offenses. Cop decides to investigate those who have not yet been attacked. Meanwhile, Driver tracks down his final target, only to discover it's a traveling evangelist whose sermons he's been listening to on the radio. The preacher conducts his services from a mobile temple tent. After patiently waiting for the sermon to conclude, Driver approaches him. The preacher claims he abandoned his wicked ways long ago, dedicating his life to guiding others. He reveals that during Driver and his brother's capture, he was the one who urged mercy. Surprised to see the preacher's wife and child during a visit, Driver wrestles with his desire for revenge. As they walk toward the shore for what may be a final meeting, the preacher shares that he has 5 adopted children. He admits he only stood watch during Gary's murder to make easy money. Despite his honesty and regret over his past, Driver hesitates before forcing the preacher to his knees, preparing to pull the trigger. At the last moment, Driver spares the preacher, allowing him to reunite with his family. He then walks back to the mobile temple tent, where Killer awaits, armed and ready for a fair fight. Seeking validation for his skills, Killer confronts Driver, who remains calm and points out that Killer has his own issues. In response, Killer takes Driver's gun and aims it at his head, noticing the list beside Driver. He mentions there should be one more name on it, the man who hired him to kill Driver, but doesn't reveal who it is. Meanwhile, Cop arrives at the scene, sneaking up on Driver. He orders Killer to drop his weapon, threatening dire consequences. As soon as Killer complies, a gunshot echoes through the air. Cop has shot Driver in the back of the head. It's revealed that Cop is not only the person who hired Killer but also the one who initially tried to eliminate Driver. He explains to Killer that he got involved when he saw the mercenary fail to finish the job at the old man's apartment. Killer, seeing the list, notes that Driver didn't even know about Cop. It turns out that Gary's girlfriend was Cop's informant, who ratted out the gang. After hearing this, Killer leaves the tent, but Cop tries to give him payment for the job. However, Killer only takes $1 for his services, calling contract killing his hobby. He ultimately refuses the payment, saying he hasn't technically killed his target. Meanwhile, Cicero arrives at the crime scene and pieces together that all the informants were connected to her partner, Cop. Realizing he might be involved, she calls the department, learning that Cop asked to be assigned to the case. Just as Cop calls his ex-wife to share his optimistic news about the case being over, he is suddenly shot in the back, the steel plate in Driver's head proving stronger than the bullet. Killer returns to his wife, while Cicero finds Cop's corpse at the scene. She keeps his past a secret from her colleagues. At sunset, Driver scatters his brother's ashes over a reservoir and drives off into the horizon, as the preacher passionately speaks to his congregation about the importance of forgiveness. The end. Thanks for watching.